Okay. So this is season 2 of the Breathing Problem Productions podcast, episode 1. Hey, I'm Rusty Kelly.
And I'm Amelia McKay.
And it has been, let me see how long it's been since the last time we recorded an episode. I don't even remember. I have to look. Let's see. Okay, click here. So the last episode was the interview with Zach in March. So that's a long time ago. We started this December 20th, 2020. So it's almost been a year, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, 'tis the season, I suppose.
The first episode was all about us talking about how we met and kind of like an overview of everything. And we talked about some films we loved. We interviewed some friends. And then we kind of got lazy and busy, and life happened and put out records, all kinds of stuff. But now things are, just seem like the right time to do it again, and people seem to like it. And I don't know, I had fun doing it. Did you?
Yeah.
We want to talk about, like, aside from records we've done, we want to talk about films and movies, and just a ton of different stuff, and interview friends again. But today's episode, we wanted to talk about Amelia and I, one of our side projects, Sectioned. We might have mentioned it, or if you are someone who, I assume you listen to Breathing Problem Productions projects, Sectioned is one of Amelia and I's projects, and it's kind of like not, I don't know if there's a hierarchy of what's more popular, like Interior One, Breathing Problem, duking it out to be more popular or something. But Section's definitely newer, and the first tape was released by Jim on Fusty Cunt. Thank you to Jim. And it was basically, I guess we should to talk about like the concept. Each one of our side projects has a little bit of a concept, and I almost would call this one like a subgenre of concave convex. If concave convex is a broad project about the human body and a relationship to it, Sectioned is more specifically about illness and and health and our relationship with illness and health in terms of the modern technological age. I don't know if that's a good description.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I would say that it has to do with like how people process and express identity through illness.
Mm-hmm.
And that just like the internet is just like the perfect platform and medium for people displaying that identity, that sick identity.
And I think also, I think some people might think that it's specifically about people that are illness fakers, even though actually I don't know if we've completely done a release about illness fakers. The first release was called Nasogastric Feeding Tube, and it was about generally people with anorexia or bulimia or eating disorders who treated having a nasogastric feeding tube, which is specifically a feeding tube that goes from your nose down into your stomach, which means it's not a permanent or semi-permanent thing. It can easily be taken out. Generally, the feeding tubes are given to a person with an eating disorder because they're refusing food, and it's an easy way to just give them a liquid food. And mostly girls online were treating the tube like a kind of
accessory
and proving that they were serious, that they were at another level. I would call it like, it's like being in the army, and you have
badge.
Your medals of honor. And although there's that kind of tube, so specifically, I guess that album was, the reason the project's called Sectioned is in the UK, the term sectioned means that you've been sent to the health or mental ward against your will, essentially. Or essentially, I could be getting this wrong, but essentially, a doctor saying to you, you are so ill, we have to send you here or keep you in the hospital against your will. And that, in some kind of groups in terms of eating disorders, is another kind of badge of like, oh, I was sectioned, etc. Then we did our second release, a sectioned called Intimacy After Colon and Rectum Removal. Mm-hmm. And that release was released on Breathing From Productions, and that one was specifically about the kind of a specific group online that is I guess specifically obsessed with the different levels of kind of how dedicated you are to, well, I guess it's beyond that, but generally it's people, or I guess you want to talk about it? It's kind of complicated. You kind of
have to go into like the like where we're sourcing and seeing all this stuff,
which is on Instagram and on the internet.
Yeah. And so if you go down the rabbit hole of Instagram, you find like somebody's Instagram, mm-hmm. and they have basically their Instagram is partially dedicated to documenting their journey, mm-hmm. with having a colonoscopy bag, and other kind of medical accessories.
And generally these people, and we're not even saying in this case these were people that were faking.
Well, yeah.
So it's complicated because, okay, to do a basic thing, these are people that generally say they either have Crohn's disease, which is, uh-huh. I guess if we read, I think most people have probably heard that word, but a broad definition of Crohn's disease is, I'm going to Wikipedia, type of inflammatory bowel disease that may affect any segment of the GI tract, from the mouth to anus. Symptoms include abdominal pain, diarrhea, fever, abdominal distension, and weight loss. And then also kind of...
Well, there's like a very kind of like self-diagnosis of gastroparesis, which is really like a symptom of something like Crohn's disease.
Well, so what we're really saying is there's people that claim that they have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, which are kind of broad and interchangeable, aka people that are saying that they have issues with their stomach. And then a lot of times you see people saying they have gastroparesis, meaning that they couldn't go to the bathroom, that they couldn't like keep anything down.
Yeah, they can't keep anything down. They vomit after they eat, or their food after they eat takes too long to digest.
Right, and again, these are very broad symptoms, and a lot of times the people online were self-diagnosing this because gastroparesis is really a symptom. It's saying my stomach isn't working properly. So what we had seen is generally people online, some of them claiming they had Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, and then finally gastroparesis, and saying nothing is working. I have bloody stool, I have horrible stomach problems, and then they were getting essentially, sometimes they would get feeding tubes, and then they would start to finally get invasive surgeries. Mm-hmm. And those surgeries would be people cutting out.
Well, yeah, most of the time I think it starts with a removal of part or the entire colon. Mm-hmm. And then what's weird about it is that like a that type of surgery can actually, you can kind of like exist with that and not go further, but there's like surgeries that you get after that where you remove the entire large intestine.
Right. So it's like you can remove the colon and still have bowel movements, and it's not too bad. But then when you remove
the lower intestine.
Right. We're probably saying some stuff wrong. The full rectum.
Oh, wait. You're kind of jumping the gun.
Okay.
Because
So
first, this is what I remember. It's been a while.
So
since
there's a
did all this
there's a
research.
colonectomy.
Right. Which is either isn't it part or the entire colon is removed.
Right. The purpose of a colonectomy is to remove the diseased portions of the large intestine, but before that, they were removing there's a less invasive version of it. So basically, because I doubt there's people that are, maybe there's nurses in here or doctors, I don't know, listening. I don't have a huge ego about this, but there's many different people listen, whatever noise, but a lot of what we were seeing was different levels of people discussing these very invasive, very painful surgeries. And then the final thing, aside from even getting the colonectomy, was getting colostomy bags where you have to go to the bathroom out of your bag. And I think in some cases you could even have that, you could essentially have a stoma, which is like the connector, and that could be eventually put back into your body, and you could hypothetically it's like, temporary. Hey, let's cut this open and move the exit to your shit outside your body.
You bypass the lower intestine, so everything that moves through exits before it ever passes through the large intestine. And so technically after those surgeries, you still have those organs. They still will function if that surgery is reversed.
Right.
But what's weird is that these people would kind of just they wanted to continue these steps. Like it was almost like
saying nothing's working. We've got to keep going more extreme and forward until finally they would do what was called they would remove the rectum, and you would have what's called a Barbie butt surgery,
which is completely what's the word, optional, basically.
Right.
And I think women, this is where it gets interesting for me, is that women who have these surgeries,
which is called a proctectomy.
Yeah.
Proctectomy. Yeah.
Proctectomy. They'd have their proctectomy, and they would feel better for some time. The one complaint that's really that kind of stands out among like all these groups of women, young women, is that they would have excruciating pain during their periods, and they would like complain of the pain so much, and then they would go to the doctor, and the doctor would prescribe them like morphine and stuff, and then they would take the morphine. It would make them feel better, but then after a while they would be like, this isn't like strong enough. I don't know what to do because like the pain is just so bad. And then ultimately their doctors were like, oh, well, if you remove your rectum, this pain will go away.
And so I think an important thing is what we're really discussing is, whether some of these people began as illness fakers or not is kind of like beside the point, because what ends up happening is you get into kind of subculture of, the best, most charitable read of it is that it's a support system. But then when you start seeing people pushing each other and supporting each other and giving advice, literally giving advice on how to tell your doctor that your symptoms are getting worse so you can get these invasive surgeries, not, there we go. Sorry, we're having technical, not some kind of question of, hey, girl, are your symptoms worse? So it would be like, how do you get your doctor to like agree to this surgery through comments? But so they would call this proctectomy a Barbie butt surgery because the idea was your anus is being sewn up. So it's like Barbie's butt where there's just two butt cheeks basically. And there's an obsession with, again, this is the final level, right? First you got, this happening, then you got this surgery, and you got kind of like a bag, and then you got your bag put in forever, and then you got this removed, and finally you've got nothing. And there's a kind of, it reminds me a little bit of eating disorder culture where there's an obsession with all that whole area of your body is just done. And then there's a lot of overlap with drug and opiate seeking behavior. And in our in the booklet to the release, there's lots of different Instagram social media posts that we found where it's not just, oh, I'm feeling, I have to take my opiates or I have to take morphine. It's complete obsession and fetishization of opiates and morphine and getting high, because that's the thing. Some people would say like, oh, would you really cut your body apart so you could take huge, you could be prescribed morphine? And yes, that's a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. These people are put in the hospital, and if they complain, that's one thing that we realized is like, there are people that have serious ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, and they deal with it every day. And then I think there are people that may have eating disorders or bulimia, and they go to their doctors and they claim that they're having these symptoms. And so the doctors in good faith are trying to help cure them. And, also we're seeing a lot of these people, specifically in places like Europe, where there's socialized medicine to where you can go to a doctor and beg and beg and beg and beg. And it's not as much. Anyway, it's a whole thing. But many of these posts are, scary. I don't know if, just ones where it's like, here's the kind of Dilaudid I got, and I'm in like a beautiful dream, haze of opiates. And also, huge amounts of the culture for the illness is a little different than, say, the feeding tube stuff, where it's pretty explicit that these girls are in a culture of pro-ana eating disorder stuff. And of course, I'm sure people may know that sometimes there's a kind of crossover between support systems of eating disorders and then pro-ana. It's not just a separate thing of like, oh, here's the pro-ana side of eating disorder culture and here's the support system side. There's little tiny crossovers where you don't even fully realize. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, in this case, their recovery is also their disorder. So it is a total crossover when it comes to like a community of people. Like, these people all really believe that they want to recover from whatever this illness is. And in that way, like, it really is like a hugely like about whatever their mental health is, and
a reflection of it.
Yeah, and I don't know.
And then you've got, essentially, there's a kind of course, the way that social media is organized in this kind of branding capitalistic structure, to where everyone is a big ad advertising their illness in a way that isn't just, I need to talk about this, I refuse to, I'm an addict, I'm a drug addict, and I think people should, have support each other and not, hide these things behind closed doors, specifically illnesses. Of course, no one should have to do that. But I think what's interesting is you go to a different side of it where the kind of the group or the culture is using as a way out, like, they're pretending like this is a truthful, open community who's refusing to be shameful, and then when you actually look closer, you're seeing advice on how to lie to doctors, fetishization of opiate use, and fetishization of medical procedures that do not need to be done.
Medical devices too.
And medical devices.
Yeah.
And so this project, has many different parts. Like in our mind, we were like, oh, we only did these 2 releases because it's almost like we're so many steps ahead of where we want to go. I think, I don't know if the next step should be us talking about more stuff that we have been interested in looking at, or if we should do kind of like a track by track thing, like where
I'd like to go into more detail of what we're talking about already.
Okay.
And then we could
move on, yeah.
Okay,
well, do we want to go back to the nasogastric stuff? I mean, a lot of it's...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's start from the beginning.
Okay, yeah, and we'll do like we usually do. You guys will be hearing it, is we'll intercut little clips of tracks that we're going to be talking about. So we'll start with the first track on nasogastric feeding tube, which was released on Fusty Cunt, and track 1 is called Hospital Visit in parentheses Sectioned. Okay, so I just wanted to say with this track and this album in a really specific way, it's very, at least whenever we were making it, I would say influenced by A-Track's Morgue. Albums like Black Slaughter. Really, what I'm trying to say is like something super minimal, which is a synth line with reverb and a sample where you don't necessarily hear every word. Really, with this track, it's like super muddled, but with delay and reverb on the sample. And the sample essentially is a sample I found of a girl on YouTube talking about how she'd been sectioned and put in the hospital and how many times it had happened and what the visit was like and how she had to be put on a tube. And in this case, this talk was more of a like looking back on it in a way of her saying that she was recovered. I think this is like super early and trying to figure out what the project was going to be. I think, when people think of our projects, and I assume some of them, whether they like the projects or not, probably acknowledge that we use a lot of samples, and I think that, this is like a really basic intro track and a track that asks the listener, in terms of like industrial or power electronic terms, to just fucking sit back and just like, here it is. This is like a meditative, dark industrial track where maybe you're not going to get all the information. You're not going to hear exactly what's being said. But you kind of, through osmosis, have to like vibe it out.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is track 2, Nasogastric Feeding Tube. All right, we're back.
What was the title of that track?
That one's just called Nasogastric Feeding Tube, and
okay. Those are your.
Those are my little evil vocals.
Yeah. Can you talk about the lyrics, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, they're improvised lyrics where I'm asking questions like, "Did you have banana today? Does it hurt when they take the tube out? How did it feel when you got it? What does it mean to you?" And it's like kind of questions that, these theoretical people might ask each other in this specific community.
Mm-hmm.
In this community. I think what's interesting is like a lot of times with lyrics, I'll do a lot of improvisation and you always make sure to write. I mean, I write stuff down. There's lyrics written down in plenty of our releases, but generally I'll like improv a bunch of stuff and then have to type it out. It's just kind of interesting. But with that, it was just kind of specific mundane questions about the culture behind it. I think, yeah, again, similar to what this tape is all about. I think we wanted to do a super minimalistic tape that was what was everything that we loved about industrial and what it could be, and dealing with a kind of, I guess, concept that is bigger than that's big and something that I feel like isn't always talked about. Although I will say, one of the things I loved so much about, say, like late era White House is either, whether it's like Birdseed or Cruz, there's people talking about pro-Anna stuff, talking about William Bennett, talking about specifically pro-Anna stuff on the internet and self-harm and how people interact with each other, specifically young girls or women, through social media. So of course this isn't any kind of new thing, but I think that it's interesting how it's grown. So let me go to track 3, which is called Life Update.
Okay, so this is me, the real me. Yeah, if you don't know me, and the past 2 years, I've been struggling with anorexia. I'm currently in hospital for it now, and I've been in here for 11 weeks. As you can see, I have a nasogastric tube, and I've had it for almost 6 weeks. Yeah. This illness is...
Okay, so that's basically probably, aside from the next track, which is your track, my favorite track on the tape, called it's basically like the middle of the whole thing. It's sandwiched between 2 tracks, and then 2 tracks. The track begins with a long sample from a YouTube video of a girl in a hospital in Australia speaking about her eating disorder and having to get a feeding tube. I love the sample also because there's like a cartoon or a TV show playing in the background, and then there's just some kid who I assume, because it's like a children's or a pediatric ward, just talking and babbling. And so there's these kind of layers upon layers where there's its own little sound collage going on. And one of my favorite parts is, of course, the girl saying, "This is the real me." So I think what's interesting about this little piece is, again, when we talk about branding, it's almost like she's heard so many videos and testimonials of girls saying that they have an eating disorder and how this is the real them and they're telling the truth. And it feels... this isn't some kind of thing where it's like, it feels fake. No, she's telling the truth. She has an eating disorder, but it feels like this concept of being true to yourself is just another avenue of kind of placing yourself in a specific lineup, or maneuver, I guess would be a better word. Maneuvering yourself in how you want the world through social media to see you and your illness.
Yeah.
The way that she speaks about why she, I think when people talk about why eating disorders exist or what disorder eating is, that's like such a huge, complicated thing anyway. The answer she gives is pretty, like, I guess, textbook. I wanted to be perfect. And to me is more of a reflection of, I guess, how she has seen so many different testimonials, Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about that sample? Do you like it?
I love that sample. It's, I don't know. It's,
I guess it's kind of...
it's like a window into somebody's own morphed perspective on themselves through
how they're trying to reach out to other people.
Yeah.
Because none of this isn't like her diary. This is YouTube, and YouTube isn't just, oh, here's a video for friends. It's you know what I mean? Like, in a way, the kind of era of MySpace of like, this is for my friends. This is for like everyone. This is for whoever can find it. And then the middle of the track is Flanger with Synthesizer PE, and then it ends with a girl talking about how the physical aspect of getting the tube, which I thought was important.
Yeah.
I think, you know, to me, I love being with you, being able to go on YouTube or search online and just find a sea of different samples and testimonials and I mean, it's just insane to think about, like, if you think about the 80s or something, or even the 90s, of people trying to find this kind of material for their own projects. I can only imagine how like difficult and hard it was. If you think about like Peter Soto's Buyer's Market, or the Sotos tracks on like Birdseed and stuff, it must have been insane trying to like find the right amount of stuff, whether you're like having to like, you know, write to PBS to send a tape to you, or like literally be taping TV constantly. It's crazy how, you know.
Yeah.
And that goes back though to like the Interior One Joseph Duncan album. We had to like get tapes graciously sent by Peter Sotos that were all taped off of the news during the Joseph Duncan Shasta thing. And because really what was on YouTube was kind of like the Shasta Joseph Duncan news report stuff that happened when she was found was like a little bit too soon to be put on YouTube, if that makes sense. Like, anyway, it's just interesting how we had to like draw from the well, because it was essentially newsworthy news stuff, but it was from the era of like people who needed to tape TV, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did we talk about, which is a side note, we haven't fully talked about Revenge Against Society, I don't think. We need to do that someday.
Yeah, we have to. So, yeah, we will.
Okay, so the next track is Today I Refuse.
Getting an NG tube doesn't prove that you have an eating disorder. If you have an eating disorder, you have an eating disorder. You don't have to have an NG tube to prove that. Anyway, I'm going to go now. Take this wire out. It doesn't make you beautiful to have an NG tube. Getting an NG tube doesn't prove that you have an eating disorder.
Okay. Well, do you have any thoughts? Because you're the one who kind of leads. Obviously, there's the sample of, you know, it's a great sample that we found because it's someone who is actually talking about the fact that, you know, she's directly saying you don't have to have an NG tube to have an eating disorder, right? Because, again, this isn't even just something that's like vaguely being talked about. Well, like, so for Today I Refuse, I really love the opening sample of a girl who had or has an eating disorder kind of directly, specifically say, you don't need an ND tube to have an eating disorder, which I think is great because it's not, I mean, I think she also says, like, you don't need an eating disorder or an NG tube to be beautiful, but she's not even really speaking to, she's not speaking to the world of people who don't understand eating disorders. She's not saying like, don't have an eating disorder. Are you crazy? She's speaking to the specific girls in this community that view the tube as something very important and special. That means they're not, a little dilettante, that they really do have an eating disorder. Mm-hmm. So it makes the speech even more, I guess, strange, because it's not like some kind of like, oh my God, you need to stop this horrific disorder. It's like, come on, guys, it's just it's almost like a resigned, sad thing, But then it goes into your part. Do you want to talk about what your lyrics are or what they mean?
Yeah. So I'll just, I guess, read it. The lyrics are, I have news for you. Today I refuse. Tomorrow I refuse. And the next you'll be sorry that you didn't make the most. I struggle to give you the least. Who are you to make me? Well, I have news for you. Today I refuse. Tomorrow I refuse, and the next you'll be sorry. You'll be sorry that you didn't make the most. So, these lyrics were actually like inspired by Louis Theroux's documentary about anorexia when he films in a recovery ward
in the UK.
Yeah, and there's one particular girl who he's interviewing, who he's suggesting something so simple for her. Like, he's like, why don't you just sit down for this interview?
Right.
And she just can't do it. Like, she just like refuses to do it. She just stands there.
She won't do this basic thing that's just like, hey, come sit down and talk to me. Like, you agreed to be in this documentary.
Yeah.
And like, she's completely just like, I'm not participating in this the way you want me, at least.
Yeah. And there's that kind of like attitude a lot that defines.
It's defiance.
Yeah, defiance, like, of in as a major like characteristic of like an eating disorder is just kind of like this really passive aggressive way of like, like at the beginning of that sample, she's like basically saying like, this is all just like this waste of time, like, and I guess like it's better for me to be in this like pain than my family going through the pain of like me dying. And it's like,
right.
It's like she just,
there's still an unwillingness.
Yeah.
There's still an anger. And I think people don't see, I think they look at people with anorexia or bulimia as like weak-willed, sad girl. But
Exactly.
there's like a total strength of like rejecting the rules that have been set on and saying like, I am unwilling to play by this. I'm going to like die if I have to.
Right.
And I think, I don't know. I think it's
there's kind of like a like when we eventually talk about future plans for like releases under this project, we have a specific person that we want to make a sectioned release about, and she really embodies this.
Yeah, because I mean, I would define her probably as an illness faker. She's definitely an eating disorder, so that's obviously not faking. But for the most part, I mean, we'll get into more details. Maybe we'll bring it up at the end of this segment.
I'd like to, yeah.
Yeah, we should, because it's just a lot to talk about with her. But I guess, but you're right in the sense that she's like the ultimate unwillingness to conform to the standards of being a human being and being alive.
Yeah.
And in fact, just to, spoiler alert, this real person who we're not giving the name of, that we followed on social media, in fact, chose to die. And it wasn't a traditional suicide. It was billed as, I'm critically ill, and I'm purposely am stopping all life-saving medicines and procedures to allow myself to die. Although it wasn't some kind of like end of life treatment where they give you like medicine to die. So it wasn't that either. It was,
I'm going to starve myself by...
Basically, we can only infer that this person essentially, because they were tube fed for the most part, starved themselves slowly. We
can infer that because her posts said that,
she was having issues with...
She's like, I completely, like, I'm having a hard time with my tube like all week, and so that means for me, like, I'm not having any kind of like food or really water.
Yeah.
So
I think another thing we haven't been able to talk about though is like there's like this nasogastric. There's the nasogastric feeding tube thing, and then there's kind of like the colostomy bag stuff, but then there's also people that have, I believe it's called a J tube, where they don't shit out of it, and it's not a tube that goes into your, just really basic, goes down your nose into your stomach.
It's a feeding tube.
It's a feeding tube
that you don't have to eat or ingest anything, and I think it's better. It's a better I guess like more reliable source for food rather than like a nasogastric, and it's probably more comfortable.
Well, the implication with this tube is
that
that it's permanent.
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming nasogastric, and again, we're not healthcare professionals at all, and we totally respect those people, but I'm assuming that can only be done for so long until they have to give you, if this is how it is, and it's either, I know in one documentary I've seen of somebody who had an eating disorder, they had a J tube, but I think for the most part you get a J tube when you have stomach problems to where you can't actually eat. There's people that have disabilities where they cannot swallow, or they're paralyzed, or there's something wrong, and they need to be fed through directly to their stomach, essentially, or I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And again, and there's people online that, from what we can see, and it's not all people, we're never broad generalizers of people, but a certain type of illness faker that is going to doctors and claiming that they have gastroparesis and their stomach can't move. And keep in mind, generally these aren't people that are in the world of I have Crohn's and I have to get my lower intestine out. Generally what you see is similar to the way the nasogastric feeding tube was a sign of how serious they are. These people a lot of times don't have an eating disorder. They're an illness faker. They like let's broadly say they like the attention.
I'm going to say like the name of the disorder that they all kind of claim to have is EDS.
Right.
Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
And also by us saying this, we're not saying that people don't actually have that, or that they can't have that, or that there's people that don't truly suffer from that. We're not saying that at all. We're talking about people that most likely are faking these things and making people that actually have health issues have a harder time.
Yeah. And I'd love to like actually understand it better than I do now.
Because what's sad is there's certain signifiers of people in their profiles will claim to have certain things, and
what is the most basic known thing about EDS is that it is like a rare genetic disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there's people are coming out of the woodwork like with self-diagnosis of these things.
It's kind of like people who say they have chronic Lyme or fibromyalgia, where it's kind of a term now that all those things can be real and people can actually suffer from them, are kind of signifiers of this might be somebody illness faking.
Yeah.
And similar, now POTS and EDS are signs that someone could be illness faking, especially when you see that as a part of their only identity, plus behaviors such as drug-seeking behaviors, and behaviors that, like, again, for a certain kind of person online, having the J-tube is a signifier of how serious their illness is. They have something that isn't invisible. They have a tube. This is proof that there's something wrong with them.
Invisible illness. So you know, any kind of thing that can verify, like validate that invisible illness is their goal, essentially.
Right, and people don't...
That can also be, like, mobility aids, too.
Right, and there's people, there's really amazing, you know, people that are disabled, that are advocates, that have made posts or talked online about how upsetting it is to them, for them to see people use things like that are, you know, mobility aids as a way to, because they're clearly illness faking, as a way to try to seem like there's something wrong when there isn't. Whether it's a cane or a wheelchair that they literally admit they don't need to use, you know? Like, because there are people that say, I don't need to use a wheelchair, I just want...
They don't even have to admit it because they can walk. Or,
right,
you know.
right. But that's its own can of worms, and I don't think we want... There's like a... I don't want to get too deep in the drama, because again, and we're gonna say there are people that have these issues, that have invisible illnesses, that have issues that are very serious, and nobody's claiming those people are not, you know, they're dealing with very real serious things. What we're talking about is people that are, you know, using the system to indulge their, for lack of a better term, ego and beyond.
Identity, yeah.
Yeah, and
I would like I mean, eventually, like the, like a future release that we'd like to do with this project will be about eds and pots and people with J-tubes. So,
and I think this person, you know, we need to keep going through the release, but this person that we are doing, that we want to do this LP about, that you know, we won't give their name obviously, but when they you know, they essentially committed suicide, it seems like, you know, it was done as a way of saying like, fuck you, you didn't believe me, you know?
Yeah, there's like even a meme that I've found that these people have, like, that many people have posted, that are, it's like an image of a tombstone, and on the tombstone it says, I told you I was sick.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like such this kind of, you know, fantasy of
getting to see your death,
getting
from
to
above.
See people's reactions and feeling sorry that they never believed you.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like, that's kind of like going back to the lyrics, that's partially like what that's about. Like, you will be sorry that you didn't, like, believe me, that you didn't make the most out of my life, my victimhood, and, like, treat me as such, because that was all you could have done for me at the time. And by not just playing along with it, you essentially are, like, making their life, like, meaningless and worthless, and, like, it's a waste of time, you know? Like, you're wasting my time. You know, that's the attitude.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so here's the final track on Nasogastric Feeding Tube. It's called Otis Toole Speaking About Pyromania as Metaphor for Anorexia.
Otis Toole, whom the law has judged sane of mind. He is currently serving a prison term of over 300 years at Stark Penitentiary in Florida. He granted us an interview.
What would you prefer in life? Sex or fire?
Okay, so this is kind of like this is the last track, and this is a weird one. You know, the title's purposely long, but basically there was a sample I really loved of, you know, serial killer or killer Otis Toole, talking about Otis Toole loved pyromania. He was an obsessive, you know, epic pyromaniac, and he's talking to some interviewers, really trying to shock them by talking about the sexual nature of pyromania. And Otis Toole, by the way, was one of the people that they think, or you know, law enforcement think killed Adam Walsh, America's Most Wanted son, and they think, you know, that he cut his head off, but as a side note, as a pop culture side note, that although there's no, I don't know, you know, he was essentially there. That seems like most likely he did it, but it's well known that Otis Toole and what's the guy's name? The guy who got it was in the Georgetown prison.
Oh yeah.
Henry Lee Lucas, you know, it's well known that they confessed to many murders they didn't do, but the law enforcement are pretty sure that Toole did kill Adam Walsh. But anyway, I think for me, I love strange non-connections. You know, Otis Toole speaking about pyromania as metaphor for anorexia, like something that seems completely disconnected and kind of like a Rorschach or like inkblot test, asking the listener to find the connections in them, whether it's Toole's own obsessive nature in terms of how he loved to start fires and you know, his own desire to burn things down, and you know, you can see the obvious connections with control and etc., and a kind of passive control of like lighting a fire and walking away and watching it. So I don't know, it's almost like a magic trick, asking somebody else who loves noise to make those little strange long form connections. I guess as simple as that. So if we move on to our second release, and intimacy after colon and rectum removal. Similarly, there's only 5 tracks on this one. This first track is called Barbie Butt Proctectomy.
My name is Maggie. I have Crohn's disease, which essentially means my body doesn't recognize my intestines, and so it attacks it like it is a foreign body. This has led me to have a number of surgeries, and unfortunately the most damaged part of my GI tract was my colon, rectum, and anus. I had a diversion surgery called ileostomy surgery a little over 10 years ago, and basically that meant that I only used...
So, that was Barbie Butt. Now, really is a like reflection of the first tape. This opens with another simplistic or minimal, I guess would be the better word, reverb-laden synth line with forefront of a sample of a woman talking about her her issues, for lack of a better term, and what this kind of, the way I think, and the thing that was important for me, the way this person was speaking and the YouTube channel this person runs is highly advertised, at least in the realm of medical, you know, YouTubers, you know, or health YouTubers with disability and illness. The way that this person's video runs is highly kind of media savvy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. This person knows how to communicate. But the point is that what they're communicating is, number one, just like we want to communicate with our audience. You know, I'm sure every person listening to it was like, what's the deal with all this colon stuff? So similarly, we were trying to communicate with the audience using her as a mouthpiece. This is what Crohn's disease is, and this is what having issues with your large intestines or having them for her at first, she said she didn't use her large intestine for 10 years. Yeah, her she showed me a picture, and we're confirming which influencer, I guess for lack of a better term, it was, and she's saying I didn't use these things, so I finally got it removed, and then finally got a proctectomy. And I think the thing with this release that we're trying to get across isn't this person's faking and this person isn't. Rather, at what point is your whole life about, and in some cases it's not a good or a bad thing, and it's a sad thing, and it's also a thing where your whole life is a reflection, or your brand is a reflection of pieces of your body cut out. And I think what's interesting, at least about this track, is the way the person is speaking is closer to somebody like Martha Stewart, where they're trying to communicate in the correct way so that their audience and the brand understand exactly what they're talking about. But what's interesting is that she has to know, just like we know, that aside from people that maybe there are people that have cancer that truly are getting these surgeries because they will die if they don't get them, or there are people that do have really serious colitis that their body is attacking itself. But she also has to be aware of and know, based on her own social media connections, that there are people that are lying about what's actually happening with their body, that are seeking out these treatments because either they are half interested in being given opiates, because the obsession with opiates is just huge. I wish we could scan like our digital booklet, maybe we can, to let people see how much there is. That's like a huge part of it, at least with some of the influencers. And the other part of it is people that want to be a part of a really specific subculture, brand, world of social media influencers, and then people that that are interested, and their identity is wrapped around removing these pieces of their body, which these surgeries are some of the most painful surgeries you can ever have. Yeah. And so I guarantee if somebody was in this room with me, they'd be like, Rusty, Amelia, what are you talking about? And nobody would ever be, just want to get these surgeries. But, there are, let's say, here's a good example of like people that identify with being amputees and they want to get amputee surgeries completely optionally. Their limbs are fine. Doctors refuse to get them for them. So there's a great example of a guy who drove outside the ER, put his right leg in a giant trash can full of ice, and his leg died, and they had to cut his leg off because he destroyed his leg, and he wanted to be an amputee.
Right.
And so someone's saying, oh my God, that's horribly painful. Would someone really do that? Yes, they would. Yeah. But I think with this, it's more complicated because there are people that actually have these kind of issues. There are people where maybe they have some problem with their stomach, but it's not as bad as they're making it out to be. And in fact, because of the either the access to drugs or the way it makes them feel or the connections they feel or the identity, it also gives them a really specific identity kind of, they know who they are, for lack of a better term.
I think it feels really, really good and powerful to get this diagnosis.
Yeah.
And
it's like getting the diagnosis of, okay, they're agreeing they're not just going to give you,
it goes from the goal being the diagnosis to then the surgery, which affirms that diagnosis.
Right. Where it's like you are getting rid of your colon, and then finally you are getting rid of your rectum. And it's like specifically the rectum thing, the way they treat it is like, you're a number one motherfucker. Like, you did it. You are like us. We are like, it's like the mafia or something. Like, we're a part of this club.
It's also like so obsessed with how like these feelings like within themselves, like any kind of pain is so like heightened to this level that they're like, why? Like, a lot of them ask themselves like, I've had this surgery, why am I still in pain?
Right. And
they go, the girl that is in this sample, her whole account of her surgeries is just this kind of
like going back to the well kind of thing, like, or
she's so like surprised in a lot of ways that
how serious the pain is.
Yeah, and how it could be worse, because like
of course it's going to be worse.
Of course it is.
You're destroying your body.
But that's the thing. These people are doing these things also like on just like a level of like believing that you have something, believing that if you get the surgery, the pain will go away. Mm-hmm. But you're cutting this like major organ out of your body.
Thing out of your body. Yeah, like
your
the
body
system
is going to just completely.
And that's the thing. There are people that have cancer, bowel cancer, colon cancer, that they have to do this or they fucking die. Right. There are people that have serious colitis or Crohn's that they have to do it, and those people have no choice. what we're saying is it's not completely obvious which is the mix of people that are doing this as an optional way. And sometimes there's overlaps, and none of those people, we're not saying these are bad, horrible people, or these people deserve to be, shamed or anything. Really, we're just trying to talk about things we see in our world and how they're right in front of our face, and we're interested in how, I guess it's like a cliche about how the human beings interact with ourselves and each other, and how identity is formed, and those are really interesting things to me. So here's the second track. It's called Wound Care.
How deep it was, and I only got in about a centimeter, so that's pretty good. He said it looked like the muscle had healed, deeper in the wound, so I'm happy with that. I'm happy to keep going, doing my wound care. It's kind of weird. This is maybe a nursing thing. I love wound care. I love ostomy care, but I think wound care is like pretty high up on my enjoyment list in nursing.
Okay, so for that track, most of it, the 3/4 of it, is a drum sample with my vocals. Lyrically, I use like part of what the sample is based on at the end, which is the same influencer talking about how her Barbie butt surgery is healing slowly, and I think
not healing.
And I think what's great and very telling is the way she says, I love
wound care
and ostomy care.
She's taken on as like an interest of her. One of her main interests in life is this being her own nurse,
right? And the idea that there's nothing wrong with being a nurse and being super well trained and aware and of how wounds heal, and that it's not gross, to the layman. Oh my God, blood and wounds are gross. But I guess it's the idea of the way that this woman speaks about it is, again, to me, another kind of tick mark in the list of things that make you wonder about how they feel about their identity being wrapped up in these pieces of them being cut apart and sewn back, together. And the idea of someone being this is very, Cronenberg-esque, right? The body horror-esque, right? It's what's the best Cronenberg movie about the brothers? We'll see. We'll just edit this out. Dead Ringers. It's very Cronenberg-esque. Dead Ringers. The human body as a kind of maze and a reflection of the human psyche, right?
Yeah.
And the opening up the human body and obsessing over wounds and the
kind of
details.
Yeah, and also the kind of dependence that someone has. So there's kind of there's kind of a S&M or
self S&M or something.
Yeah.
With at least in her case, with her own watching her own wounds slowly heal, or she was having complications, or so it's the mind can kind of race and think about, oh my God, is this person or other people like this, getting these horrible wounds and then obsessing over them, and as a reflection of how they see their body as this constantly harmed thing that needs to be pulled apart and pushed back together, and how it's almost like if there's a labyrinth in their brain, is this the way that they're trying to, find the exit to their labyrinth? Like you said,
yeah.
I will be healed. I will be the labyrinth, the kind of math problem that is my body will be solved when all the wounds are healed, right? And they're like their own kind of
well, in many ways they are like, since they're doing this like to themselves, it is like you're actually like deepening that maze, like making it more and more impossible.
Right. I mean, and again, we're talking about Cronenberg, but like J.G. Ballard, Crash, or whatever, when we talk about the modern world and technology and identity through capitalism and through kind of reflected back. So this person finds answers and comfort in their own body falling apart and them choosing to tear it apart. Now, we're not even saying that this person doesn't have health issues, right? I don't know the layers and the length, but no matter what, we can talk about without making like really broad, like this person's bad, this person's good generalization, saying the obsession with how these wounds heal, with how deep she gets, figuratively in the realm of the damage done is really interesting,
Yeah.
And the way that she packages again and sells it on a YouTube video and makes literal ad money is amazing. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's more mind-blowing, not in some kind of moralistic, this is evil, although, there's something to be said about the inner workings of like hyper capitalism or what, through this specific case. Okay. The third track is called Stoma Obstruction, Watery Output.
Hi guys. So I'm doing this quick video because I am experiencing my first blockage. It's really, really painful. I worked last night and I'm supposed to work tonight. I called out because around noon I woke up to I thought I was dreaming, just like severe pain. And when I actually woke up, I realized it was my stomach.
Okay, so that was stoma obstruction, and this is, a sample with some minimalistic noise stuff. But this one is, if you guys can't tell, essentially this person is describing how they are irrigating, which I believe, someone who's in the field could, say, you totally got it wrong, but apologies if I do. She's irrigating the food that's in her stomach, I think. Like taking it out. She's using water to spray it out.
She's talking about a blockage.
Right, she's claiming that there's a blockage in her.
Well, that's actually, I think, like what I've heard a couple people say when they have stomas.
Right, a blockage, also known as a bowel obstruction, leads to the output from your stoma slowing down or even stopping completely. Blockages can occur either in the small or large bowel. How do you get rid of a stoma blockage? Try different body positions, massage the abdominal area. Again, I guess this is a kind of our own, the real life body horror thing again, with a person making, number one, a video to ostensibly share to the community the pain of having this happen to you, and then the way that it's kind of interesting. It's in this one, the way she's speaking isn't the very kind of media trained, I know how to communicate what I want to communicate about this specific subject. This is I'm a human who's in a lot of pain, and this is really bad. And I think what's interesting is the way that we, in terms of the people that understand how social media works, you know, you can have posts that are ads, you can have posts that are organized and highly pre-planned and edited, and then you can have essentially real life posts that are, you know, dirty and messy, and it's just me being me. But no matter what, with the way that the internet is it's just that isn't any more real. Even if what she's going through is horribly painful, and it probably is, the choice, again, I would say the choice to put it online is interesting. It's not a negative thing, but I think what's interesting is generally if there was this person was in front of me, they'd say like, I had this horribly uncomfortable, terrible, disgusting thing happen to me, and I want other people to be able to talk about it and see it, and that's why I'm sharing it. I think it's less of a critique and more of a kind of conversation about the way sometimes the absurdity of all of this being on kind of cataloged and put ads, like the idea of like ads coming on around this long video of a person screaming in pain while they describe watery output of their stoma, which is like such a specific thing. And the idea that I'm getting targeted ads about, you know, model planing glue while I watch somebody talk about their stoma output while I don't actually have any kind of stomach problems. Or what if there are people that are interested in people with stomach problems, people that kids with eating disorders who are interested in, it's almost like there are certain people that are maybe they're going to become illness fakers, or people that are going to be malingerers or have Munchausen's, and they're almost shopping for researching the kind of style that or group that they're going to be a part of. And what's interesting is that's the way that internet shopping and social media is organized. It's all about these algorithmic things of this. Things are grouped together in an easily searchable way. So it's like the thinking woman or thinking man's way of choosing the extreme body extreme, you know, health issue, the deciding which group you're a part of, and whether it doesn't even matter because it's a system, whether that person who's making that one video really is just, I just want to share my story so other people won't feel alone. Maybe that's not even true, by the way. Maybe they're doing it for their own reasons that are beyond that or not about that. But no matter what, even if they are doing it for those reasons, the way that the system works with this kind of algorithmic design is going to put it in a box that is used in a very weird way, for lack of a better term. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's why hearing somebody record that, like when I think about, say, and everybody's different, when I think about, I had to get my gallbladder removed. If I think about like making you film me while I writhed in pain, now I could also see somebody saying, no, you could share your story of your gallbladder. You know, I just like I've shared my story a million times of my addiction. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's multiple layers, because even when I share my story of addiction, you know, there's ego reasons or there's positive reasons. It's the point, I guess, that we're trying to make is that there's so many layers to it.
Yeah.
And they're all interesting layers, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, here's the next song, PSAP.
And externally. Then I had this surgery to remove everything. Obviously, there's an incision there where everything has to heal, and I couldn't even sit for a couple of months after that surgery. I couldn't use tampons whatsoever. Ain't nothing going up there. I'll tell you that. Nothing was going around that area. I'm just being honest with you guys. It took a couple of months before I was brave enough to try having penetrative sex. Anything that would go in that area would stretch out my vaginal opening.
Okay, so that was penetrative sex after proctectomy. Again, traditional vocal track that ends in a sample. I think there's kind of multiple layers. Number one, it's the sample at the end is the influencer talking about her issues with having sex with her partner after getting a full proctectomy and her rectum removed. Which is total brutal, horrible surgery, and of course probably sex isn't going to happen for a long time or has to be changed up. I think there's with this part, it's simply revealing the kind of mix of dealing with these, I don't know, I think, consequences, and also I guess taking these things that seem to be completely unrelated or to some people are totally disgusting, the idea of like surgery and a surgery that won't heal for years for whatever reason, and trying to mix that with love and intimacy, and a woman describing how intimacy seems to be impossible, which is heartbreaking. And then again, the layer of that being shared through social media. I think that the booklet is also important because we use this one influencer for the sound sections of this, because a lot of the other influencers barely talk, or if they do talk, they either don't talk on Instagram. The other kind of ostomy influencers, most of what they share are pictures and like memes and stuff. Mm-hmm. Again, like interesting memes, like don't talk about how beautiful, don't talk about how skinny we are because we're sick, which is the strange overlap of eating disorder, memeing, and language, pro-ana language, where it's like, yeah, I'm skinny, but it's not my choice. I don't want to be skinny, but also then a selfie of a girl looking like, pretty or whatever. The point is she feels like she looks pretty. And then that juxtaposed with, I guess, gore porn in terms of the ostomy world on Instagram. So, I think there's a lot of use of this one influencer just because she talks so much and her stuff is really varied and interesting. And I think that's one of them, again, going back to the idea that it isn't really about a specific judgment, but rather just the truth of what is being said, and the way that gore, surgery, pain is meshed with the idea of intimacy, or the very modern idea of sex advice, right? Which is a very kind of on-brand thing of, I'm going to be your sex advice coach. Another kind of way of money making, for lack of a better term, but mixed with this super specific ostomy thing, which again, algorithmically puts this person at an advantage, right? I'm not just giving sex advice. I'm giving sex advice to people that have removed their rectum, which feels like so surreal to me. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything you want to add?
Just kind of maybe an aspect of the trade mm-hmm. of kind of like a normal functioning, healthy existence with this like pseudo self-love.
Yes.
And care mm-hmm. for yourself that actually takes like over just the idea of being interested in anything other than your own body and this,
And self-love again is like that. is resold and packaged, through like social media sales wise, like I'm giving advice about myself and self-love and how you should love yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like it feels complicated, I guess, for me.
Yeah.
Or unreal or untrue, or that it's a method of mixing your own literal physical pain and mental pain through the lens of figuring out how to brand yourself and make money through ads. And I think all those things, I don't know if they're necessarily like super positive,
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the last one. Colectomy fetish.
Where having a total colectomy and my rectum also removed in this surgery, as well as having my anal canal closed up. Yes, I know that is very unusual, and the most unusual part about my surgery is that no, I am not having an end ileostomy placed during the surgery because I already have one. So I think it's important that we rewind and we talk a little bit about the different things that they can do in proctocolectomy surgeries, because there are a few different options for people in this position.
Okay, so that was colectomy fetish. I mean, I would say the sample for this is just the ultimate wrap up of a person giving very well communicated advice as to what these various surgeries are. And I think that there's the first time someone may hear it, they just think like, this is a very smart person talking about your options. And then when you hopefully have listened to the album and gone through the booklet, there's another layer of almost like a person giving advice in a kind of fetishistic way of, just like we talked about before, if a person is searching for an identity or a group to be a part of, this person is almost like the dealer, or what, you know what I mean, for lack of a better term. I think and I don't say that implying that the person, the influencer, is some insidious evil person who knows exactly what they're doing, but I think that just like there are people that are watching those videos because they need to understand, I think the person creating the video knows that there are also people that are illness fakers that are watching these things because they are fetishistically wanting to recreate what could happen in their mind, like fantasizing about these different surgeries that could happen and the way that they could remove parts of their body. And like, I think that mixed with social media, the entire system, is in the ease in which all of these terms and specific medical procedures are all laid out.
They're options.
Yeah.
That you can select from.
And it's like, I don't want to sound like cliche or like some like cheesy grad student, whatever that means, but like when you think about Cronenberg or Ballard or all these people that were talking about the mix of technology and the human body, it's right there. It all came true. You know what I mean? The way that the human body is like fetishized and pulled apart and then sold through a kind of simulation is it's not what if, it is. You know what I mean? And that there are people that have these surgeries that need for them to happen, and there are people that want the surgeries to happen, and they want them for different reasons, or they want them because they want to be amputees, or they want them because they want to have these things removed, or they're addicted to opiates, or they just want to be a part of something, or it gives them something to find an answer in. All these things exist at the same time, and they're all scary. And there's probably someone fucking jacking off to it too, you know?
Yeah.
So thank you for staying with it. We're going to keep talking about plans for the future. These are the 2 tapes that we did. And I don't even, I think the tapes are very specific. It's not like we're huge people that a lot of people love listening to our stuff. But when we do get feedback, I always say, this is probably it's a newer project that isn't as, successful, not as, I guess, popular as something like Interior One that deals with true crime, which is just popular for many reasons. We got to do an Interior One episode. But I think, the point, obviously, of Noise, of Industrial, of Breathing Problem Productions and all our projects doesn't have anything to do with the most popular project, right? I think this is why for season 2 of this podcast, we wanted to talk about a project that's maybe a little lesser talked about, for lack of a better term, But I feel like what's interesting is a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, in terms of the ostomy stuff, Amelia discovered all this stuff. You go on Instagram and you're always doing research, for lack of a better term, or you're watching the way that all these groups work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, do you know how did you discover this stuff? Was it just discover?
That's a good question. I actually really don't remember the beginning of that whole era
specifically, but there's something that I mean, you've always kind of shown me in different, I'll be the person that's talking in broad strokes, but Amelia will be the person that finds all the different, the
spectrum
of different Instagram influencers that are either, okay, so it's we talked a lot about the ostomy stuff, where we talked about eating disorder, feeding tube stuff, but then there's people we mentioned this before that are interested in the getting, they claim that they have gastroparesis and their stomach doesn't move, so they need a J tube so they can get fed. And you'll see certain people that finally get a tube and they're very excited, and they're literally doing lives where people are asking, and these aren't huge giant lives with thousands of people or even hundreds, it's 20 people, and someone might be asking how they got their doctor to agree to this, or how they got their doctor to agree to how what the law did, or
it's interesting because there'll be people who are totally open to giving that advice because it makes them feel like they're this kind of, they're a gatekeeper
of knowledge.
Right. And then there's other people who are
I don't want to share.
Yeah, they do not want to share because they feel it is a gatekeeping thing, that they feel like they're the only ones that deserve to have this, and they, everyone's a faker. And they're not.
Right. I think that's a big thing too. Okay, right now there are people that are on the more extreme thing where they have these tubes and they're giving out really bad advice on how to fake certain things to get certain things. Or there's people that on a lower level are, right now there's a bunch of articles that came out about the way that Tourette's is what is deemed a sociogenic mass illness, where they're basically saying all these kids in high schools, mostly girls, are claiming to have Tourette's, which, by the way, mostly men have Tourette's generally, actually, are claiming to have Tourette's that just appear out of nowhere when they're teenagers.
And it all happened after, post-pandemic.
And
it's that's actually a contributing factor of why these people have suddenly had this outbreak of tics.
And what's interesting is generally all these people admit that they look at social media, and they even admit that they watch this huge Tourette's TikToker / Instagrammer, who we won't give the name of because I just don't think we should give out names, but you probably already know who they are. It's gone to a level that isn't even related to our little niche of being interested in people that are Munchausen's or illness faker people, where this person is hugely, hugely popular, and they claim they have not just Tourette's but other
Well, they have a whole history of different things that they've claimed that they've had. And it started, when they were a teenager.
And they claim they had selective mutism.
Many different, it's countless, really.
Yeah, we couldn't even name them all. But what's interesting is this person now
has millions of
followers. And their followers, if you click on like some of the most commented ones, all claim to have Tourette's now. And she will follow a lot of these people too, which to me is like a feedback loop of saying, oh, that's okay.
Well, it's all under the guise of
support
awareness
and support.
Yes, and support. We're creating this community where everyone can
There's
feel
no judgment.
Accepted.
Right.
And no one's judged because the whole world doesn't understand us, and we at least get to be little sisters of this. I mean, that is across the board how all of these things, and like how all these things work. And that's why like I ended up kind of having a focus on Tourette's and these accounts, because it's like they're not all that different from the people who I was looking at before, which all had these
they all claimed to have POTS or
EDS. Yeah, exactly.
And they all had, claimed they needed J-tubes because they had gastroparesis. But instead it's like a lower level of I have Tourette's.
Yeah, that's something super interesting to me, because obviously all the stuff that we're talking about in the last two like releases, these are things that have consequences, physical consequences, as a result of taking on the identity of and having this illness.
Right.
And faking Tourette's isn't going to.
It's not as much of a like dedication of having to go through surgeries, and that's what's interesting is like also just like there's people that clearly have Tourette's and it's a huge deal, and there are people, and these people are very clearly again throwing themselves in the game in a very awful way. And anyway, it's just amazing to see the larger pop culture writing like I don't know if they're medical essays, but they're
articles
and journals about these things that are happening 100%, and it's nothing that is being made up. And the articles are generally trying to be like nice and say, well, they don't have Tourette's, but they have some kind of like stress disorder, so they're ticking
FND, or there's like a couple different things
they're basically
they try to say,
right, because it's and this is probably a good thing, I guess, to say like, well, we're not just going to outright say this person's an illness faker, because we can't prove that, but they do not have Tourette's, and these tics are something else. And what's interesting is this social media influencer, as the more and more articles come out, I think they tried to ignore it at first, but now that more people are even directly saying their name out loud and writing their name, it's upsetting them greatly, because they feel found out. But at the same time, it's not affecting their bottom line, from what I can tell. They still have tons of followers.
It actually, I think, really does validate their sense of victimhood,
right,
which they already...
That nobody believes them and everyone is after them.
Yes. So actually, it's like super weird in that way. That's like, you cannot stop this person from doing this.
Right.
Like, there's no amount of like awareness that
of
you
calling
can,
them out or something. And I think what's amazing is like, there's kids that are live in the UK, and they're like, we get special privileges, we can we have Tourette's, and so everyone at the school has to like treat us a different it's really interesting. And then on another note, on like another kind of pop culture illness faker note, this isn't a faker, we'll say a name. Eugenia Cooney is a well-known YouTuber and influencer who has she's admitted she has an eating disorder. She doesn't say she has one right now, but she has in the past. She is, if you don't know who this person is, or you want to Google them, they have very serious anorexia, most likely, and their mom essentially supports their eating disorder, has no issue with it, doesn't want them to be helped. And this girl, Eugenia, was big on YouTube, but now she's a Twitch streamer. She'll sit on Twitch for 6 to 8 hours a day.
Without drinking water, going to the bathroom.
Yeah, and just we'll play video games, and then we'll do weird kind of this might sound like a conspiracy theory, but I don't think it is. Like, we'll essentially do kind of fetishistic stuff because some people watch her. Either there's people that watch her that hate watch her. There's people that watch her that are pro Anna girls that love Eugenia. There are also fetishists that watch her. That's just the truth. People talk to the people that are her audience. Also, Eugenia will post things like blue butterflies all the time, and the blue butterfly. This isn't some conspiracy, like it's a symbol for but the blue butterfly is a pro Anna symbol. Yes. I think there's like a forum that's named Blue Butterfly or something like that. Or
if you go to any of Eugenia's followers who are clearly pro Anna,
it'll be
in their username.
Right. So it's just used. It's not just some conspiracy thing, and she uses it. So no surprise, someone who's anorexic is just like we talked about at the very beginning. There's an aggressiveness and a defiance, and it's really interesting to follow her. Although I'm sure we'll never do any kind of like release about her. I think that's a little too on the nose.
I think I would love to do maybe something about anorexia by proxy, which
totally.
Eugenia and her mother have
that kind of relationship.
Very textbook kind of thing, and that's like a whole thing to open up.
And then, like, as a kind of winding down of this episode, we talked about how we want to do an LP, basically. That's like a sectioned LP, a true full length, about this person who was an illness faker and actually basically committed suicide, but said this wasn't, again, assisted suicide. They said that they were choosing purposely to not take their medicines or any kind of life-saving devices or, whatever they needed, and they were choosing to die. And from what we could understand based on their posts, they essentially had a J tube, which is a feeding tube again. They were essentially only taking the most basic things, and we will never know for sure, but what we can tell is it seemed like they essentially starved to death slowly, this person made some YouTube videos and social media posts that pretty much directly said that our dog is being crazy. Social media posts that pretty much said they were sick of this was a woman, she had a girlfriend, that people were claiming that she was illness faking or she was exacerbating symptoms in order to get attention, and that was it. She said, other people in my family had tried to call me out and say that I was faking things, and that was it. I told them, well, you know what? You think I'm a faker? Then I'm going to die. I'm going to let myself die, which is the ultimate, again, there's a kind of crossover with eating disorders and illness faking, Munchausen's behavior, where this person in videos is literally saying, you called me out, well, guess what, now you're gonna feel bad for me and I'm gonna die. And that's I've never seen that before, where someone is actually saying, I'm refusing all of my medicines, but their medicines were always, they didn't know what they had. And their medicines were essentially just them saying they had gastroparesis and invisible illnesses. So there wasn't some like regular medicine they had to take aside from eating.
Yeah.
So this isn't, again, someone that got an kind of injection or, assisted suicide. This is somebody that starved themselves to death slowly, posted.
And they ritualized the entire thing.
They said they wanted a death doula,
They went to a hospice for
and they didn't die in the hospice.
Yes, and
I think they were kicked
out.
They were kicked out of the hospice, I believe, because they probably, and again, we can only infer that the people in the hospice probably realized this person was faking, and they did not have any kind of...
Well, they didn't need to... They could choose this option of life, and it was like, we're not going to like help you commit suicide here.
Exactly. And then she finally died at home. And
she also, on a side note, she had her own personal like wedding for herself, kind of
right, and took wedding pictures. I mean, and again, none of this isn't about celebrating somebody dying or thinking it's some funny thing. It's a shocking, horrible, sad thing. And it isn't always as easy as, and these are the bad people of the world and they should be called out. It's simply saying these things exist in the world. They're complicated.
It's incredibly complicated.
And they're hard and they affect everyone, and it's worth talking about. So that's kind of what Sectioned is really about. It isn't about sneering or laughing. It's about documenting things that are seen in the modern world that I don't think have really been seen before, you know, and making art about it. And I think there's a lot of empathy is what I'm saying. And I know that gets used a lot, you know, power electronics, empathy, but I think it's all about trying to form connections and understand, you know, human behavior patterns. Well, I think that's it. We're going to sign off, but we're going to try to release an episode a week if we can. I'm sure we'll fall behind, but hey, we'll see what happens. And thanks for listening. I'm Rusty Kelly.
And I'm Amelia McKay.
This is the Breathing Problem Productions podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Whom the law has judged sane of mind. He is currently serving a prison term of over 300 years at Stark Penitentiary in Florida. He granted us an interview.
He's really preferring life. 6 or